Uh-oh. That's gonna be a problem. I gotta call some backup.
Yep.
Hey, Ethan, we got a problem. I just looked at some of the early models for this coming winter, and if these hold, we are in for a very brutal winter.
I would say so myself. We're in for a little bit of everything this winter.
Yes, it seems that we are. Like, some of these returns are absolutely insane. I think we gotta talk about this a little bit. What do you think?
I think so too. As you guys know, Triple P is on the case.
Oh, yes. That's right. Triple P is on the case. So last night, I was looking at some model runs, and I wanted to see what the long-range forecast was going to be looking like, especially as we head towards past the summer months, going in more so into the autumn and the winter, just to kind of see a preliminary look as to what may be going on, especially with the recent conditions that I've been noticing across much of the world, including the El Nino. And I wanted to see what at least what the preliminary models were going for our winter weather forecast. And this is what I saw right here. What I'm presenting to you right here is the CFS monthly model that we have going on across much of the continental United States. And what this effectively is a climate model. It's one of the three main climate models that are used on Tropical Tidbits and other websites as well. And it's also a rather reliable model that I've used to both compare and contrast climate in the past. And this is some of the things I was starting to notice. So starting around later into the season, starting around October and November, you have this shift going away from summer weather towards autumn and eventually winter weather. And as we start to get going, across November, you do typically see above average temperatures over here in El Nino years. And in December, that path tends to continue right here, especially in much of the upper Midwest and the northern Great Plains. And I will emphasize this very quickly. Even though these are warmer temperatures than average right here, these are anomalies. So for example, if the average temperature is around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, add about 10 degrees more to that makes your temperature 30 degrees right there. Still very cold, but not colder than what you have on average. It's actually a little bit warmer than the 30-year climatological mean. But as we get past December and move towards the new year of 2027, something very interesting starts to take shape. These are our temperature anomalies at the surface for January 2027. And across much of the Deep South and Southern Great Plains, you start seeing a dramatic shift from much warmer temperatures than average to much colder temperatures than average across much of this region. And that has been a very interesting thing to look at, especially as we go towards January, and this is also in the peak of winter. And this isn't just a one-time thing, and this isn't a one-time incident. This has been a consistent trend across the CFS particularly. But as we get towards late January and into February, look at this. We are looking at, across much of the continental United States, much colder temperatures than average from California to Virginia to New Jersey, from coast to coast. And this has been a dramatic shift from what I've typically seen before. And this has been a very intriguing situation that I've wanted to keep an eye on for quite some time. And as we go into March, that progress continues across much of the southern United States, much of the southern two-thirds of the United States, with cooler than average anomalies from coast to coast. This isn't necessarily a situation that I haven't seen before. I've definitely noticed these kind of patterns before previously, but what I find kind of peculiar with this is a lot of the cooler temperatures are further to the south, mainly concentrated in much of the southern half of the U.S., especially the southern plains, Texas, the deep south of the U.S., and the southern Midwest, where you're seeing your warmer anomalies in areas like the upper Midwest and in the mountainous regions of New England. That has been a very big shift compared to what we've typically seen. And that's actually a pretty significant shift from what we saw last year. Last year, we saw Arctic blast after Arctic blast after Arctic blast across much of the continental United States, especially in the eastern two-thirds of the United States. We saw these polar plunges just shifting and really crushing much of the upper Midwest, New England, and the East Coast in very crippling cold temperatures for a span of 6 weeks at a time. And that is a situation that we were watching. And what makes it so different this coming year compared to last year is a lot of these colder temperatures have considerably shifted much further to the south. And it's not just the temperatures that I've been watching that has been kind of keeping me alarmed. That is only a part of the piece of the puzzle, ladies and gentlemen. What we also have to watch out for is our main sea level pressure anomalies. Here is what we have for across December 2026. What you're noticing with all this blue right here, these are much lower than average these are much lower than average pressures. And typically what you see with this is the lower your pressure is, the more likely you have unstable weather. And the more unstable weather you have, the higher chance you have of snowstorms, severe weather outbreaks, generally bad weather. And what we're noticing is, especially across about, I'd say, a good 90% of the United States, the pressure across it is considerably lower than average, and particularly along the West Coast in December. You're looking at a pressure difference of about, I'd say, 4.5 millibars below the climatological mean. And that may not seem like that much, but a considerable drop in pressure like that is very noticeable. And that can be the difference of, instead of getting a few showers, a few isolated snowstorms, that could be the difference maker of, and instead of getting just your regular stuff, you getting a lot worse weather conditions over there. And this isn't just in one isolated area. Across much of the United States, you're seeing a considerable drop in December in your pressure right here. That can translate to more winter storms, severe weather outbreaks, and other unneeded weather. But that's not all. As we go into January, across all of the United States, like 98% of the continental United States right here is under this massive low pressure anomaly. And this is pretty much two big pockets of it here are across much of the southern half of the U.S. as well as parts of the western U.S. over here. And what that is telling me is the weather that we're seeing is not only just going to be colder than average in these areas, but it's also going to be more extreme than average compared to what we've seen previously. And if this model holds, what we're looking at is potentially a pretty active winter. And then as we go into February, you see that pattern continue, although starting to break a little bit in the Great Plains. But across much of the eastern United States, you are seeing those lower pressures, those considerably lower pressures than average. And that, coupled with the colder temperatures, is a very big concern of mine. And that's not all. Last thing we need to look at is our moisture. Because looking at our precip anomalies, this is going to be critical. Let's go ahead and start in November, mainly concentrated in Texas and parts of the deep south, where you're seeing a lot of this precip and these precip anomalies over here. What that is an indicator of is more precipitation, whether it's rainfall, snowfall, or anywhere in between, than average. And that is a factor that you're going to want to pay attention to, and that's going to be very critical for this next part. As we go into December, it remains mostly concentrated across much of the southern southeast United States, although it does start creeping into parts of the mid-Atlantic like Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and even as far north as New York City. But also in California, you're seeing a much larger anomaly than of precip than average, and that's mainly due to the fact that it's the rainy season and the Pineapple Express starts to move into the region as well. And that's why during the winter you see California, all the stories of the flood, the excessive flooding that you get over there. That's kind of why it's so prevalent. And then as we go ahead and get into January, things start to shift a lot more. As you notice, the entire eastern half of the United States is either at or above average, although there is a very big blob of above average for Florida, which is indicative of potentially big severe weather over there if that holds. But ultimately, that's the kind of thing that we're paying attention to across much of the U.S. Because once you start seeing that, coupled with those cold anomalies that we noticed earlier, that is an indicator to me of, okay, that could mean a lot more winter weather for areas that do not typically see this. And then as we go into February, it is relatively dry across parts of the lower Mississippi Valley, but we also do have that moisture anomaly across parts of the Midwest over here in the western Midwest, as well as the Great Plains, and concentrated on the east coast of the United States. And given the cold anomalies that we have, what it's telling me is, at least according to the CFS, this winter, at least after January, is going to not only be a cold winter for a lot of people, but it's also going to be a very active winter across much of the United States. But how realistic is this scenario? Because there are a few factors that we need to consider with this. For starters, we are in an El Nino. Wherever you are when an El Nino hits during winter can be very important. If you're in the Midwest, that typically means a more mild winter. If you're in other areas like the Great Plains, that can mean more temperature swings. But if you're in areas like the East Coast, for example, those are your areas where you could see the strongest amount of nor'easters over there. A few infamous examples of this are 1997, 2003, and 2016, to name a few. Those are some big blizzards that hit especially Washington, D.C., Philly, Baltimore, and New York. Those are those areas that over there that during an El Nino typically get the most snow over there, and that is something that I'm paying attention to as well, and that is also something that I've been keeping a very close eye on. Also, we need to take a look at a few other factors as well, not just the fact that it's going to be an El Nino. We also need to look at some other runs as well to go, okay, the CFS is definitely in support of this, but how exactly is it going to be reflected on the other models? Because at this current point, it's just one model. You're looking at this and you're going, okay, it's one model. What is the rest of this saying? What's the general consensus? And the consensus is a bit interesting, to say the very least. Here is the other one of the big three right here. This is your CanSIPS model. And let's go ahead and take a look at your main sea level pressure anomalies, starting going into October, November, December, January, and February. Here is November, a little bit lower than average across much of the United States, similar to what we were starting to see with the CFS. Albeit it is a bit strong, not stronger, but it is a bit weaker than what we were seeing on the CFS. The CFS was going way into it. The anomalies were absolutely insane. We were looking at like multi-millibar drops compared to the climatological average. The CanSIPS is a bit more on the conservative side, going at about, I'd say, a decent 1 to 2 millibars below average, which is still a pretty significant drop. It makes it more likely for some pretty significant weather to happen, whether it's severe storms, winter storms, or whatnot. But it's not as drastic as what the CFS was showing, albeit it is still there. So we do have a kind of a disagreement, not necessarily in the fact that we're seeing below average pressure, but on the fact of the intensity of it. And that's going to be key going into December. December, it's kind of a little bit all over the place. In the west coast of the United States, it's lower than average, which can kind of be reasoned with given the fact that we have the Pineapple Express over there that's going to be moving through the region. You also have a little bit lower anomalies across much of the Midwest, the southern Midwest especially, and in the southern half of the United States, particularly in the deep south and Florida. So that's what you're looking at starting in December. In January, you are starting to notice a couple other things. You're noticing higher pressure than average across much of the northern United States and lower pressure across much of the southern half of the United States. What that means generally is what you're going to see in the northern half of the U.S. potentially is less active weather and more active weather in the southern half of the U.S., whether it's severe or winter weather. That, coupled with at least the anomalies we were seeing earlier, does make an interesting tell for this. And then as we go into February, though, that difference changes. And the CanSIPS is generally, at least from what I'm seeing, in agreement with what the CFS is going for. It's not in agreement with the intensity entirely, although keep in mind, this is a relatively powerful anomaly that we're seeing across much of the United States. This is about 80% of the United States still in lower than average pressure right here. And what that is an indicator of to me right here is more active patterns. You have the CFS going haywire, you have the CanSIPS starting to go, okay, I see what the CFS is going with. So that's what we're looking at with this. But we need to also look at our temperatures as well. We need to look at our temperatures at the surface and see how they're doing. And here's what we got for the CanSIPS. Already, we're in a bit of disagreement. Across much of the United States for December, instead of it just being bulky and warm, it's more all over the place. In the mountain regions, it's going to be colder than average. In parts of the southern United States and Texas and parts of the deep south, it'll be colder than average. Across some of the Great Plains, it'll be colder than average. Same thing with some of the Great Lakes regions where they get lake effect snow. But in other areas, like the East Coast, it's going to be warmer than average. Same thing with the West Coast. It's kind of more all over the place with this, and there's a bit of a big disagreement here. Not necessarily in terms of the pressure, but more so temperature, I would say. And then as we go ahead and go into January, my oh my. This is what the CanSIPS is forecasting, and it's not nearly as insane as what the CFS is going for, albeit what I will tell you is this cold snap that the CanSIPS is forecasting is actually going for about a month earlier than the CFS. So there's a bit of a disagreement with the timing here as well. That said, the intensity is definitely still there, albeit instead of parts of the Great Plains and Texas, the bulk of it is actually in the upper Midwest, in Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, and parts of Illinois. That is a pretty considerable shift from what we've seen previously in this video. And now you're starting to wonder, okay, how exactly is this going to pan out? And I can explain to you what this scenario would mean. What this would mean ultimately is kind of like the CFS, you would see a bit of a more active winter, and you'd also have much colder temperatures to kind of back that up. And those colder temperatures would in my opinion, allow for more snowstorms, allow more for more winter weather, and even allow for more Great Lake snow, Great Lake snow as well. And that is also going to be very critical, because if we see colder temperatures up there, it's going to be a bit of a hazy situation. It's going to be a bit haywire, I would say, with that. And then as we go into February, surprisingly, the CanSIPS is pretty consistent. It's not shifting it one way or another, albeit it does expand a bit more into the east coast of the United States. It mainly remains concentrated in the Midwest and the Great Plains. So this is an interesting situation that we're going to want to watch, because this is an El Nino year, and some of the forecasts we're seeing are relatively consistent. Instead of the massive temperature swings, or even the milder winter that you'd see with a normal super El Nino that we're seeing this year, you're seeing a more consistent type of winter, which is kind of curious to me, and that's kind of a bit of a wild card, because with El Nino, you're looking for a warmer winter, a more active severe weather season, and generally more nor'easters across the eastern coast of the United States. It appears to me that only the last little part of what I just said is going to be true, at least according to both the CFS and the CanSIPS. But we also need to take a look at our temperature, not our temperature, but rather our precip. And here is the precip, December 2026. The eastern two-thirds of the United States are at or above average. This is indicative to me of stronger and more nor'easters over here, maybe more severe weather potential. But when you are when you're coupled with the colder anomalies in terms of the temperatures, that to me also speaks out. If you're seeing colder and more precip than average, what that tells me is that's going to pump up your potential snowfall right there. Going into January right here, a lot of this precip mainly stays concentrated in the eastern half of the United States and starting in California with the Pineapple Express. Going into February, the Midwest becomes dry, although much of the eastern half of the United States, especially the East Coast, more nor'easters over there, generally going to produce more stormy weather for you guys. So that's what we have with the CanSIPS for right here. So overall, based on the two models I've seen so far, the CFS has gone really haywire, but the CanSIPS is also not too far behind, and it's also more consistent as well. We need to see what the NMME is doing next to kind of get a general consensus between which seems to be the more realistic one. And this is what we got for you guys. Let's go ahead and look at our temperatures for, right here. Let's go ahead and pull these up starting in November. Across the United States, it's about above or near average across, especially the northern half of the U.S. where it's above average. The NMME right here already screams more of an El Nino type winter. So this is a kind of an interesting jack of all trades right here, because that's what we're seeing with all three of these models. So you have a bit of a general disagreement in terms of the fundamentals. You have the CFS and the CanSIPS more so wanting a much colder and stormier winter than average, whereas the NMME is going, hold on a second, it might still be stormy, but it's going to be warmer than average. And then as we go ahead and move into December, that pattern continues. Although you are starting to see those below averages creep into parts of Texas over here. And then as we get into January, hold on a second, we're seeing colder than average temperatures. It's a similar situation to what the CFS is going for, albeit the warmer anomalies are generally more dominant. But across much of the southern U.S., you are seeing these colder temperatures. And then going into February, it's generally in agreement with what the CFS is going for, albeit not nearly as oppressive and not nearly as expansive. But regardless of that, things are getting interesting. Things are starting to cook with all three of these models. It's definitely a situation that we're going to want to watch. And last thing we need to check is our precip. And looking at it from the NMME's perspective, to me, it looks like much of the United States is going to be getting a lot more precipitation than average. But it's mostly concentrated in the east coast of the United States. What does that tell me? Stronger and more powerful nor'easters right here. Potential for more snowfall over there, especially when those cooler anomalies kick in, as we've seen with all three of these models. It's a situation where, yes, it is early, but we can start to paint a good picture as to what's going on. The main points I can take away from these are these. Number one, all three models generally agree that it's going to be a much stormier and much more active winter than average. We're seeing the anomalous amount of low pressure across much of the United States. That's indicating to me more active weather, and that's typically how things work. Higher pressure equals less weather, lower pressure equals more weather. But the main disagreement with that is how strong are these anomalies? The CFS was going absolutely berserk and absolutely insane with it, whereas the NMME and the CanSIPS are going, hold on. We're still seeing this, but it's not going to be as extreme. So we need to see what the kind of middle ground all three of these models are going to be going for in the coming months. So that's the general point I'm taking away with this. All three models agree to some extent that it's going to be a stormier winter. The question is how stormy at this point. The second point is there is going to be more moisture and there's going to be more precip than average, especially in California and the eastern half of the United States. There might be some dry slots in a few areas, especially in the Midwest, depending on the model. But overall, you are looking at more moisture, and that to me says two things. More winter storms, and in the case of the Deep South, more severe weather outbreak, especially in Florida, where they typically get more severe weather during the winter than they do during the summer. And especially as those troughs and those ridges start to dive back down into much of the continental United States, you're going to have your shear back, you're going to have your Gulf moisture still, and that's going to help you produce the baroclinic forcing needed for your low pressure systems, for your mid-latitude cyclones, and for your severe weather or winter weather, depending on where you are in the region that storm develops. So overall, a more stormy and more moist winter is expected. The third point I do want to point out is, at least across much of the eastern United States, there's going to be not necessarily similar to 2025-2026, where it's the entire region was colder than average, but it's going to be more concentrated, at least out of the northern parts of those areas. Those areas generally, to me, look like they're going to be warmer than average, typical for an El Nino. But what's not typical for an El Nino either is the cold, concentrated areas of well below average temperatures hovering in the Midwest, the Great Plains, and parts of the Deep South. Typically, it's mainly concentrated in either the Deep South or the East Coast, or in other areas in the mountains. This is a unique pattern that we need to pay attention to. And this is something that we're going to want to watch, but the early takeaway I can say is, at least after December 2026 and after the new year going into 2027, you're going to want to watch out. As time goes on, and as we get more data, at least early on, things look pretty active, and we'll continue to keep you updated as more information comes in for all of this. But with that being said, we are going to go ahead and close this video out right here. Really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. And if you like this type of video right here, please let me know in the comments down below. Also, feel free to join the Storms United Discord server for some more behind-the-scenes action. The link to that will be in the description. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.